And further in studio, I have Yonelwa Diko, or that's over the phone line. We'll have Yonelwa Diko, that's the ANC Western Cape spokesperson. In studio, I have with me Zanele Lwana, that's the Deputy National Convener of the Black First, Land First movement. We're hoping to get Ernst Roots as well from AfriForum over the phone line, and then Nhlanhla Mtaka, who is a political analyst. Of course, you're at home. I'm most welcome to join in this very important conversation. You can tweet us at ANN7TV, and we'll be happy to engage you. A very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us, Zanele. It's a very emotional topic, a very emotive topic that we've been discussing over and over again. And of course, it's a very important topic as well. Going back to the Archbishop, and for him to raise this issue, particularly during Easter, which I suppose is what bishops do. I mean, it is their time to shine. But this message that is giving through, obviously, his congregants, with the radical economic transformation that President Jacob Zuma has been trying to align with his cabinet reshuffle, making sure that he has the relevant people in place to make sure that this happens. How do you think this changes the dynamics of this reform?
Yeah, the call from the Archbishop Makgoba to call for a land and economic codesa is part of the regime change agenda that has been currently going on in this country. And we have seen how white settler monopoly capital has continued to mobilize different sectors of society, particularly opposition parties, such as the Economic Freedom Fighters, the Democratic Alliance. We see through the bishop now how also the churches are being mobilized to push for a regime change agenda in this country, to undermine the president in this country, to undermine the powers that the president has to reshuffle his cabinet and to try to pronounce on what needs to be done for this country to move forward. It's part of the broad agenda on how recently we have seen white-sponsored marches, racist marches, spearheaded by formations such as the Save SA, to call on ordinary South Africans and particularly the business sector to strengthen this call that the president must step down because the president is leading the country to the dungeons, is not moving black people forward in this country. As Black First, Land First, we reject the call for land and economic codesa. We had codesa pre-1994. What has that done for black people in this country? Because black people still remain landless in this country. The Joburg Stock Exchange, 97% of the companies listed there, and 97% of them are white-owned. Black people still continue to own nothing in this country. White people in particular, as people who are holding on to the stolen land from black people in this country, have shown no remorse on stealing the land of black people, have had no conversation on how they are going to bring back the land to black people. So this call to say we must enter into a dialogue with those who continue to oppress us today is a plan, is a regime change agenda plan to distract the main focus that is radical transformation of the economy and the return of the land without expropriation. The president of this country, Jacob Zuma, has came out several times to say that we need to expropriate land without compensation in this country if we are to change the lived experience of black people in this country. And we strongly believe as a movement that this is a call that should be supported by all black South Africans, by all progressive South African organizations who strongly feel that there has been no change for black people and therefore we should move forward. We have proposed as a movement, rather, on the 27th of May, we have called for a land imbizo. We have called for a land imbizo, the Black First, Land First movement. We've extended our invite to different political parties such as the ANC, including the Economic Freedom Fighters as well, to also churches and youth formations to say that we need to meet as black people and discuss the issue of land. And we must come out united with one voice on how we are going to make sure that the land is returned to black people. We have also called as a movement to the MK veterans, to uplift forces in this country, to say this is something that you fought for and land has not been returned to the hands of black people. So we must unite all of us as black people.
Right, let's get other people into the conversation as well, as we continue to ventilate this very emotive topic of land redistribution. We have on the phone line Yonela Diko, ANC Western Cape spokesperson. Yonela, thank you very much for joining us. You know, President Jacob Zuma a few days ago said he's not surprised that he's ruffled a few feathers as people continue now to come out as we see these marches with regards to radical economic transformation. A lot of people responding from different spheres of our society. We've seen the NGOs coming up, Save South Africa. He says he's not surprised by this. Now we have archbishops, people from the religious sector of our community also calling for codesa. What is your reaction to that?
Thanks for having me, Audrey. The first thing I think we want to say is that Bishop Makgoba has really compromised himself by always having a populist posture and jumping into moving bandwagons instead of being relied on for Christ-like counsel and Christ-like advice. In fact, the one of the foremost theologians back in the 1800s called Georgia Harkness, a woman, she said that the tendency to turn human judgment into divine command makes religion one of the most dangerous forces in the world. When you have someone like a bishop who takes his own personal views and then presents them as a view of the church, it speaks to this danger that we have, because ultimately we can't now rely on Bishop Makgoba to give us any advice, even on human rights, even on other issues that would necessarily be the domain of the church, because he's compromised himself by jumping into the bandwagon. And I think there's lots of lessons to learn, even from the Pope, who is in Italy, who never really gets involved in any affairs of Italy, whether it's about Berlusconi, who's accused of all kinds of things, but the Pope always keeps his counsel and reserves his judgment only on human rights issues and other issues. Now, the second aspect, of course, is the ignorance of the codesa process itself. Firstly, the codesa, people who were involved in codesa knew that this is an amalgamation or a union of unelected people. You had 248 delegates from 19 organizations before election. So they didn't really genuinely represent anybody, because no one had elected them. But it was just forces that wanted to create conditions for the upcoming elections. In fact, the first working group, which was focusing on the constitution, acknowledged that we're going to have an interim constitution up to 1993, but we can't have a constitution that is prepared by unelected people. The final constitution would have to be prepared by the National Assembly, and of course was adopted 1996 to 1997, because there was an acknowledgement that the true representative of the people would have to be elected and would have to be in that National Assembly. It would be that National Assembly that then has the task to build all these aspirations that people had. Now, the idea that you've got people who don't have confidence, or at least who have got problems with the ANC, that it's the executive and it also has the majority in government, having been elected by the people, it creates this sentiment from these Makhobas that somehow there must be another parallel process that must be created. And we reject that. It's nonsensical. We condemn it. As the people in codesa acknowledged, the real machinery that must be used to serve people's interests must be the elected structure in parliament, in the executive, and of course appointed by the elected, which is the judicial. There is no other process and program and structure that can be used to serve the interests of South Africa except the ones that are elected. And that was acknowledged even by the codesa people. So the ignorance from Makgoba really must be rejected and abandoned.
Well, thank you, Yonela. Also joining us on the phone line for a reaction there is from AfriForum, Ernst Roots. Ernst, a very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. So Yonela says we have an elected body that is responsible for running this transformation that President Jacob Zuma himself has democratically and constitutionally put in place. And yet we have the religious leaders coming out and having this parallel views to what we have as a democracy in South Africa. What is your reaction to that?
Well, we can have a so-called codesa or a imbizo or a summit on land reform, but we might just as well have a imbizo on the preservation of unicorns or on whether Elvis Presley is still alive, because having a codesa about unicorns would be a waste of money and a waste of time, yes. But if we do have such an imbizo or a summit on land reform, and we go with what the majority party is saying, not the majority of people, because what the majority of people are saying on this issue is not the same as what the ANC or the majority party is saying. We will lose jobs, we will have increased unemployment. In other words, if we have more aggressive land reform in South Africa, we will have more inequality, we will have more poverty, we will export less and import more, we will have less food security. We can go down the list, but the irony is what will also happen is people will lose even more faith in the ANC, which might probably be the only positive outcome of such an Imbizo. And the reason why I'm saying so is there's two core issues here. When we're talking about this so-called radical economic transformation and taking the land and redistribution and so forth. The first issue is it won't work. There's an abundance of evidence that it won't work unless your purpose is to destroy the economy. Then it will work. You will succeed. The second issue is that people really don't care about land reform. You can look at all the polls that come out, and I can cite some of them if you want, that every time when people do these studies, they find that people on ground level, people care about unemployment, people care about crime. But if you ask people on ground level, and if you do polls, you will find that there was a recent poll by the Institute of Race Relations where people would ask, they had a list of things that they could choose from. What could be done to improve your life? And the amount of people who said land reform will improve my life was 1%. So there's a massive gap between what people, especially black people in South Africa, are saying on ground level and what the ANC is saying. I think this is the one, and organizations such as this Black First, Land First, and so forth. I think this is maybe the one issue in this country where there is the biggest gap between what people are actually saying and what these so-called representatives of people are saying. So we will destroy the economy if we do this, and we will not be executing what people really want.
Wow. Ernst Roos there from AfriForum. I don't know where to begin, Zanle. Perhaps you can take this up. Ernst, they're saying that a lot of South Africans do not agree with land expropriation. What they're worried about is unemployment. And yet, land expropriation really, you can't separate the two. If you juxtaposition the two, you need the land for you to own the economy. But it seems to think that that is not important.
Yeah, so one position we need to be clear on as black people is to first and foremost never take white racists seriously on any issues that concern black people in this country. This man is speaking utter rubbish, has no idea what it means to be black in this country, to be landless and poor in this country. Black people need land in this country. Black people are preoccupied with unemployment because the very same land thieves who own the means of production in this country, as black people, we constantly have to rely on them to pay us slave wage and continue to oppress us in this country. Black people need land in this country, not only for bread, not only for survival, but for the sake of our dignity as the African people in this country. This person is actually silent on how white settler monopoly capital companies such as Lomnin and Remgro, that belongs to Johan Rupert, that have been at the forefront to call for regime change in this country, because as we have come out clear as the Black First Land First movement, because white people are angry in this country because finally President Zuma is saying we need expropriation without compensation. We need to transform the economy of this country radically. So white people are angry at this because they know themselves this is the only opportunity that would close or end the history of humiliation on black people. White people, just like this man, do not show any remorse on the land that they stole from black people. And that's why the codesa that is being called by Makgoba is actually it's a fallacy. It's not going to take place. What we have seen is how opposition parties such as the Economic Freedom Fighters, instead of saying we are going for land as black people, they've given political power to the Democratic Alliance to be in charge of key metro cities in this country, such as Johannesburg and Tshwane. We are clear as the Black First Land First movement that currently now black formations, including political parties, we are all pulling from different directions. We are not speaking with one voice. That's why we have called the land Imbizo in this country. The land Imbizo, I must make it quite clear that is not an invite extended to white people. We are not going to enter into any form of conversation with white people. We are creating a space where black people who seriously want change in this country to meet in one place and come out with a clear plan. We are not actually even going to wait for the president, because the president has been calling for constitutional amendment so that we can expropriate land without compensation. We are not going to wait for the president. We are going to mobilize our own people. That's why we call on progressive forces such as the MK veterans and the APLA forces to take the land issue into hand, to take it seriously,
right.
And we must go for land as black people.
Okay, let's try and get a neutral voice to this. We have a political analyst joining us over the phone line. That's Nhlanhla Mtaka. So thank you very, very much for joining us in this conversation. I want to assume that you have been listening to the different voices that we have been getting with regards to this topic. It appears there's a bit of discord with what South Africans want, their ideals when it comes to land expropriation. We have AfriForum that seems to say that, you know, a lot of majority of South Africans are not worried about land expropriation. All they're worried about is unemployment. And then we have, of course, the Black First, Land First movement. The ANC is saying that this is a very critical thing that we need to make sure we get sorted out in South Africa. What is your take on that? Of course, the codesa, which Archbishop Makgoba has called on, if we throw that in the mix, how do we sort this out?
Firstly, it's unfortunately that the environment has been poisoned. Hence, you hear people accusing each other instead of asking serious questions. For example, if the point of departure is around what the bishop has said, the first question for me will be, why now? Because this call is a good call, but it came too late. Same as President Jacob Zuma, ANC have been in power for 22 years. So to say that the president has been calling for land, we just did that, I think, 12 months ago. But for the past 22 years, we had this problem. Perhaps the first question is if there will be any discussion, it should be why now, and what will be the different approach to address this matter. Because if we can go, for example, to the bishop calling for what he called codesa, one assumes that by codesa, he means that all parties should sit down and discuss the issue of land. But the real question to the bishop and everyone else is the struggle in South Africa was indeed about land. So anyone who proposed any form of trying to address this issue should also give us the how part, because really some of us have been listening to statements, whether they're coming from those who are against the president or those who are for the president. They are just statements. No one is telling us how, because the issue of land has nothing to do with one political party, because no land was taken from ANC, PAC, or AfriForum. The land was taken from the African people. None of these people who are presenting their case are saying anything about the African people who have been the victim, firstly, of those who took their land, secondly, of those who delayed the return to the land. Hence, I'm saying the unfortunate part now is that the environment has been poisoned. Any issue in South Africa that has to be discussed, people are taking different positions, and we end up not getting to the real issue. The question for me is, what would be different now after 22 years, and how these people propose that we move forward? The president has set the constitution as the route. What is the bishop is saying, and what other people are saying? Those are the three. Those are the mechanisms that we must discuss, because at the end of the day, we must address the issue of land.
A very important question, and Nhlanhla Mtaka, the political analyst. Perhaps we could get Yonela Diko to respond to this. What happens now? We've been having this discussions over and over again in Parliament, at home, when we're sitting in the streets, at work. It needs to be pronounced going forward. What practical and pragmatic measures have been pronounced by President Jacob Zuma going forward when it comes to land expropriation? Because it seems we're deviating and then looking at other issues and pointing fingers and accusing, political parties taking advantage, obviously as we go to 2019 with the elections coming through. Yonela, I do hope you're still with us. Okay, we seem to be having a problem with that line. We'll come back in studio, Zanele. I'll ask you the same question. You know, we have the BLF, obviously, you know, crying out for this land expropriation, all those conversations we have been having. But what needs to be done going forward in terms of practical measures to make sure that this actually happens 22, 23, 24 years into democracy and we're still having this conversation? People want to know what's going on.
Yeah. So as the Black First, Land First movement, we are quite happy that actually the Treasury, under the leadership of Malusi Gigaba, has hired Professor Chris Malikane, who is based at the University of Witwatersrand. And we have looked at his proposal on how the Treasury should run and what should be the agenda of the Finance Ministry in this country. Because if we speak of radical transformation of the economy, then the president needs to be in charge of the Treasury. And we think that this is a good indication. We have seen the reports on how the professor says that nothing in this country is going to move forward if we do not have a system on how we're going to take land and expropriate it back to black people. The professor has talked about the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, the nationalization of the mines, and the nationalization of the strategic sectors of the economy, and how political parties need to be clear on this call for land expropriation without compensation, and we support this call. We have seen particularly how the Treasury, under the leadership of Pravin Gordhan, was captured by white monopoly capital, was captured by the likes of Rupert and the Oppenheimer family and any white person who has a direct ownership of the economy of this country. How the Treasury was used to safeguard white interests, how the Treasury was used to make sure that today we don't have a state-owned bank, how the Treasury was used to make sure that we don't have a black licensed bank. We want the Treasury actually to take seriously the recommendations that have been made by the professor. These are recommendations that are going to lead us towards the right direction in changing the lived experience of black people in this country. But also, as black people, we can't be worried about foreign investors who have done nothing to change the lived experience of black people in this country. Investors, if they do want to come to South Africa, and because currently South Africa, or the African continent as we know it, is the playground of imperialist forces, where profit-driven white companies come into Africa, they generate all kinds of profits, and black people don't benefit in any kind of way. If we are to have a conversation on who needs to be the investor or not, or what should be the nature of transformation in this country, we must begin to be quite clear as black people to say even investors that want to invest in this country should invest in this country on the terms put forward by black people.
Absolutely, and there's a very important conversation that we could have on for days, and we hope that all sectors in this country will be able to get involved, have this dialogue, and make sure that we have a solution going forward. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. Let me take this opportunity to thank my guests tonight who are involved in this dialogue. Yonela Diko, ANC Western Cape spokesperson, was on the phone line. Zanele Lelwana, in studio, Deputy National Convener of the Black First, Land First movement. We also had Ernest Rees from AfriForum on the phone line, and Nhlanhla Mtaka, a political analyst. Of course, you're at home for participating in the conversation. We appreciate your tweets and we appreciate you engaging us. Well, it's time for a very short break. This is ANN 7 Prime. We're back in a few minutes. Stay tuned.